All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy Friday. This is our regularly scheduled roundup stream. And just to reset for anybody who might be new or just check this out, this is when we usually go through, find some posts, usually blog posts, used to be Reddit posts. So we're leaving Reddit behind. I've got up here actually our Lemmy instance, lemm.ee. But Lemmy is a not Discord, sorry, a Reddit alternative app, and the server I happen to pick was Lemmy, lemm.ee. And you can see here from this chart, and maybe I'll zoom in slightly, we are now the second most populous. I'm looking at this correctly. The second most populous community on this particular instance, which of course is nothing in the world at large, but small things. So we are now at over 260 subscribers, which I think puts us now second only to the Meta channel in terms of subs. So huzzah, we passed Adventure and point and click and narrative games a little while back, and then we've just recently passed UK politics. This is this I think maybe, see, can I click on that to have it sort? Because on mobile it doesn't let me sort. It doesn't look like this does either, so it's a little bit weird because it's actually sorting on users per month, which still puts us below but in terms of the actual numbers, we are in second place. So congrats, and new folks will be hopefully hopping in all the time as Reddit continues to circle the drain. At this point, I'm sort of frustrated, I think, with Reddit, and I don't even mean Reddit, the corporation, the company, the group. I'm actually a little bit frustrated with the moderators and the reason of individual subreddits. And the reason I'm frustrated is that I don't know why you would stick around at this point. I think that Reddit has made clear that even the illusion that a particular subreddit is yours, they've smashed it. They don't care to even portray that illusion anymore with what they've been doing with various subreddits, forcing them to essentially bow to their will and threatening the mods and demodding folks. So at that point, to my mind anyway, when you see that, why do you want to stay? I know you've built communities and you feel like, I don't know, that you have something, but you don't have anything. Reddit has it. I think at the end of the day, you may think, well, I built whatever community X with however many thousand members and it's mine. And I'm not going to give it away to Reddit. I'm not going to go away from it. I'm not going to give it up. But it's not yours. They've made clear it's not yours. They made clear that to not even pretend that it's yours. It's theirs. And so as long as you go around with the party line, whatever that is, I suppose you're okay. But ultimately, it's not yours. You don't own it. You don't know anything about it. It's Reddit's. And so at that point, I would just leave. I'll just give it up and leave. But I guess you get to that point, which I think we always discuss with moderators, which is the ones that are in it for sort of the power point of it, for being a mod and being able to be in charge. And I can see how that is something that some folks might look at and not want to give up. You don't want to give up being in charge. But here's the facts. You're not actually in charge of anything. Sure, you can tell off some regular Redditors, I suppose, but guess what? There are admins and folks with hammers behind you. You're not the chief. If anything, you're just that pretending. You're like the guy in prison who gets to boss around other prisoners, but ultimately you don't have any more power than the other prisoners, only what the guards let you believe you have at any one time. So I don't know why you keep sticking around. Leave, and then hopefully your community will follow you. And if your community doesn't follow you, then I don't know, it probably wasn't about you anyway. And I get that starting over may be tough, but at least you can start over somewhere where you theoretically it's a little bit more yours. And with Lemmy, granted, I'm not on my own Lemmy instance, but I could do that. I could take those steps and make literally my own instance with my own thing on it. I mean, it's as much or little as I want to, but I have a lot more control on things than I do with Reddit. And Reddit has obviously shown themselves, I think, to be poor shepherds of this whole community thing. So leave. Don't stick around. Hey, RPG Grandma. Bullcatcher says, isn't Reddit a publicly traded company? It's time to move to a competitor. Competition supports the community. I'm all for it. I believe it is. Yeah. And here's the thing about it. And I don't want to get just on a Reddit tirade, but I don't necessarily hate Reddit or anybody for that matter who runs one of these services to want to make money. You need money to run it. This stuff doesn't come for free. I host a bunch of things my own, and I see how those small things with a small amount of traffic and everything, how it every month I see that subtraction from my bank account. It takes money, and it's not a crime to want to make a little money, to be able to profit off this thing you've built, but you want to try to do it in a good way. You can do these things and still be a fair and positive caretaker. What seems to happen is that once you involve the markets, once you involve shareholders, that being a positive caretaker part just goes out the window, and you just start chasing the bottom line where you could eke out as much profit as possible. And I think that's where these things go bad. There was Cory Doctorow. He coined that phrase in shitification, which is awesome. And you've seen that. I've seen it pop up a bunch. You may have seen it pop up a bunch of various feeds. I encourage you to go find, maybe I'll post it somewhere, the article that really goes into it, because it's really fascinating and really, to me anyway, was really enlightening. And things like, oh yeah, like you can really see this happening in various ways. And he really lays it out. Like, here's how these things, here's the kind of whys, here's these come to fruition, and here's sort of what they look like. Fascinating. People are comparing lunch breaks. I'm at 1:37 p.m. It looks like Bullet Catcher says lunch starts at 11. RPG Grandma says as early as 9, 10 a.m. Whoa. Ian says Sly Flourish has been talking a lot about the enshittification of various hobby-related platforms. Yeah, because we keep going to these various either publicly traded or large corporations, and they undergo the same process. I mean, really, if you read that original enshittification article, and at least for me, when I'm absorbing it, really thought like that's also kind of the OGL nonsense from earlier this year, was enshittification. In a way, it's a little bit different than kind of the classic enshittification, but at least to me anyways, I could see in what Hasbro Wizards, whatever, was doing as very clearly a sort of enshittification. So it's really, that should definitely be the word of the year at this point, enshittification. Okay, enough about that. Hot nonsense. Let's go take a look at some blog posts. I had a couple from last week that I didn't get to that I wanted to read. I have a couple from Prismatic Wasteland, just having to get to, and then I got one from a Tumblr feed. I know Tumblr is still technically out there, but I didn't realize folks were still really posting on it. So someone still got a Tumblr, and we'll go there. But first, let's go to, and this is, I'm back to my Blood Orange Tangerine Spindrift for the Working Man. This was posted to the Seed of Worlds blog. Punit squares for courtly intrigue. Let me zoom in here a little bit. It's at seedofworlds.blogspot.com, dated 14th of June, 2023. Punit squares for courtly intrigue. My home campaign players are venturing back into courts and politics after a big block quest on the frontiers with major implications, and I need a quick way to work out court factions and intrigue. My thoughts turned to Grendel Mendel using Punit squares for monster design and adapting Punit squares for treasure on Mindstorm. And why not use Punit squares? I'll have to go to these for later. Maybe we'll go down a Punit square rabbit hole. In this case, for politics, one could go infinitely deep and subtle, but since I have a crowd I need to make sense of, I'm going to just go with our Punit setup. Coming into these courts, I can work out lots of the players, and what I need is a quick way to batch them up and figure what the groups and factions are. The quick method I am working to here is, first, list who is present, NPCs, faction representatives, etc. Place them all across the Punit square, make sure factions have a representative NPC, and then finally figure out what are the quote-unquote open court and quote-unquote back channel settings. Hey, no, sorry. Welcome. Adapting the Punit square itself. I set one axis as positive and negative, I tag it admire or support and fear or oppose for a broad sense of the attitude of the NPC. The other axis is field or court with open action and political intrigue on the other. This is more to reflect the person's strengths, not an exclusive box. You might run into them in open court or in back rooms, but where they choose to act will be their preference. All right, so we have this a diagram with a square setup. So the square is set up with 4 boxes. The columns are prefers open action and prefers intrigue, and the rows are admires or support, and the second row is fear or suppose. So you end up with 4 squares. Does that make sense? I've written in the past about how I use factions, both as framework to snap random NPCs to, and then he's got a link to see NPC motivations to meet player roleplay preference, and as a way to explore cultural bleed and make the world feel lived in. And he's got another blog reference. For this situation, I had 3 groups to mesh together. The individual NPCs that would be present and known from before, the factions and groups present at the location because of where it was, the locals, and the groups present because of what activities were going on, effectively a winter court. Let me zoom here just slightly, just to get it bigger. That's definitely bigger. Even bigger. RPG Grandma's eating nachos with pickled cactus. I love nachos. I can't say I've ever had pickled cactus before. Sounds interesting. Oh, let's see. Where was I? For this situation, we got that winter court. Okay. Prior to this, I had not figured out what any of these thought of one another or how they interacted, who supported whom, etc. To get that all sorted out quickly, I decided to set it all up as how they react to the players barreling into town and let them all coalesce in support or opposition of the players. This was reasonable, even on the realm politics scale, as the players have just come off completing an epic quest. In other circumstances, maybe not, quote unquote, everyone would have a view on a smaller party. First, I tagged in all the named and known PCs, mapping them to the Punnett square. Who will openly support and or aid the party, who will oppose them openly, and similarly, who will support or oppose them covertly. Next, I look at all the factions, both local and realm, and see if any of the NPCs present count as a clear representative of any of them. Those factions get tagged with that NPC. For all the other factions, I map them to where they fall on the grid. And some may just have no dog in this fight and be around in the background. Once all the factions who would support or oppose the party are placed, I figure out a figurehead NPC for each of them, typically using a linked to workflow, unless who they are is obvious or I have a good idea. The head of the local Goliath clans is most likely going to be an Elder Goliath, for instance. With all this done, the last thing to do is consider the arenas. Where are these open and covert moves happening? Is there an open court? Or does all business take place in garden parties or around jousts, in a guild hall or outside a church? Where are people watching and being seen such that maneuvers, challenges, and declarations of support are public? Similarly, where are the covert actions taking place? Whispered conversations in castle corridors, smoky feast halls during hunts and woods while others are out of sight. These two, quote-unquote, open court and, quote-unquote, back channel settings will vary place to place, even over time at the same place, but looking at all the factions present will give clues as to what those are likely to be. This helps me keep things coherent for high politics campaigns, particularly when a campaign changes gear and other levels of realm politics start to intrude. You do not need to track all the NPCs all the time. Just make sure whoever you do run into are representatives of their faction, and the factions can be recurring foils or allies at different locations. Some other thoughts and tools for this. They mention Lich's Librum has a faction set generator called Folks and Factions. A Blasted Cratered Land has a local faction generator in Movers and Shakers. Throne of Salt creates a great Houses Grim history in You Remember Our Venerable House. Mash the button on some of those, then patch the different levels together using this Punnett square to get your seething political court. Finally, for your quiet power plays, we have courtly communications through the Gift of Rings in Iron, Amber, Wood, and Bone, using courtly rings in your games by A Distant Chime. All right, so we had a bunch of references in there. You know, the one thing I would like about this, so the Punnett square thing is, gosh, it's been so long since I've heard or worked the term Punnett square. I would have liked to have seen the example of just to see what this looks like when they've filled in a bunch of stuff. But we can imagine each one of these squares would have folks written in there. What I do like about it is that it does, once you have your boxes, and I'm guessing, I don't know if it has to be 4 boxes. Presumably, I don't remember the history or how Punnett squares, if you're supposed to just always have a square 4, or if you can have, 3x3, 4x4, whatever. But here in this case, 2x2, we only need 2 options each. Are they acting in the open? Are they acting behind the scenes? Are they in support, or are they in opposition? And then what you can do is just go through your factions and individual NPCs if they are factionless, or I guess if they are considered their own faction, and then you place them in those spots. And what you have at the end of it is you have a nice, presumably, hopefully, easy to read at a glance thing. You could do it on a note card. Maybe you could even have note cards for each one of these. So you'd end up with 4 note cards, have them written. And as the party's going through, you just look at your diagram, look at your note card, and you can say, oh, here's where they act. I mean, you could even, if you needed to, add some numbers to these if you wanted to roll something. So, maybe you have, I don't know, if you're on a 1d6, 1, 1, 2, 3. I mean, you could probably play around with these depending on which ones. You could just have 4. I mean, it could be a d4. You got 4. You could have a d6. Change the probability slightly, or have just a nothing happens kind of thing. If you were on, say, having some kind of downturn or faction turn, and you wanted to see if any of these groups acted, you could do something like that. So there are many ways to use it. Like I said, I think the only thing at this point I would have liked to have seen is just what their example looked like at the end, and maybe how they actually used it. I think sometimes, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this as well, we come up with these wonderful things like, hey, we should do this, or hey, this is what I do, but we don't actually show what that looks like. Some stuff it's difficult because unless we have a stream with our game, it's hard to show you. Here's what it looks like in the middle of my game when I don't have a streamed game to show. But in the case of a blog post, I feel like you could probably, and just posting an image, I think you could take a picture of what it looks like and maybe a little explanation. In this case, this is what I did with it, having it here. Or here's how I referenced the Punnett square. But I like it. If you need something to set up your intrigue or just factions in some way, this is a nice place to put it. I'll have to read up more on Punnett squares because I feel like there's probably some other, I don't know why I say I feel like, I think there's probably a bunch of applications. I know they link to some. Maybe I'll come back to those later, but that was good. Yeah, these are the 2. But I got other stuff to do first, and then maybe we'll come back. I'm just going to scroll these over to keep my... Okay, I think that's correct. Next up, from Chicago Wiz. Let's see, is there a way? Unfortunately, I don't know how to switch my sides. So I'm going to be cutting off. Well, actually, what I'll do, what should I do? All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hide myself so that I'm not cutting off the text. Richie Grandma says, on a card, that would work out nicely. Yep, I agree. And then Nosorian says, I do like that the focus is intended to be player preferences because playing politics requires a lot of player interest, or at least investment. It is. And it's a nice way for just getting some generic stuff. I think they made a good point that you can go down as many rabbit holes and you get really subtle. But in the end, I think you just want to get down some basics. Where do they stand? Whatever. I think oftentimes the subtle stuff is going to come out as you role play the situation. What you kind of need, especially when you're not sure what your party's going to do or everything, is you just want to be able to block people out into, oh, are you this? Are you that? Are you this other thing? Or are you this other thing? And having some kind of classification where you've thought about it at some point and said, okay, I've got, yeah, you're either for or against, and you're either open or hidden. So you just fit in one of those. For open, for hidden. Against open, against hidden. Bam, done. Okay, so from Chicago Wiz's Games, which is at chgowiz-games.blogspot.com, this is called Chainmail in My OD&D. And this is a companion blog post, which talks how a companion to an episode of their, I guess, I don't know if this is a web series or I think looks like it's a podcast, which talks about how Chainmail expects you to adapt it for the game you want to run. This post goes into details that seem more appropriate for written word rather than talking through them in the podcast. It also has links to source materials, which obviously you'll have to pull up the blog post yourself and then find the links. Ever since rediscovering AD&D or Holmes and then OD&D in 2009, I've wanted to have a game where I could easily run a mass combat of dozens or hundreds of opponents and have the PCs involved, whether leading the troops or surviving a bloody combat, or however the PCs had stumbled into the fray. That search started with chainmail, took me through adopting Dan Collins / Delta's Book of War, becoming involved with Ral Partha Legacy's Chaos Hordes, playing Hordes of the Things, grafting Magic and Fantasy on top of Neil Thomas's 1 Hour War Games, and now, in that big circle, back to chainmail. Along the way, I found two main resources for helping me to meld chainmail into their OD&D. And then he mentions complete chainmail, a Grognard, which is a retroclone chainmail, and our old friend Daniel of Van Keep's YouTube channel that also does some chainmail OD&D stuff. So if you're starting on a similar journey, there's a lot of material available for you to mine from. My method for using chainmail and OD&D has been to use the mass combat tables or approach for 1 versus 1 and 1 versus many, or many versus many. I experimented with a simple table based on Book of War's at hit values and foot types. It looks something like this, and then he's got a hand-scrawled note with some stuff on it. The basic mechanic is to throw 1 die per fighting capability, FC, aka HD, of the attacker. If the attacker is a unit, then it's 1 die per hit die or fighting capability times the number of troops in the unit. The target to hit is based on the armor class of the defender, which is this middle table that he's figured out here. For ease, I grouped them into defending types: light foot, heavy foot, armored foot. So if the defender's wearing chain, you need a 5 or more to hit. The rightmost table is what bonuses the attacker might get based on their type and what armor class they're attacking. For this determination, I use the approach from complete chainmail to rate attackers. So let's say Ailey is a skilled fighter wearing chain and armed with a longsword. I'll rate her as heavy foot attacking. Anyone attacking her needs a 5+ to hit. She's level 5, so she will get to throw 5 dice when she attacks. She can take 5 hits. She's knocked to 0. She has to make a saving throw versus death to merely be injured or unconscious instead of dead. Now, this worked very well for all the types of combat. It went fast and furious and allowed me to have quite a mix of combats. But Chicago Wiz, how is this chainmail? Where is the type versus type with all the crazy dice combos, such as Lightfoot needing 6 hits to score 1 hit on a heavy horse? Where is the man-to-man in fantasy combat? Well, you're right. But as I mentioned before, this was my first stab at using chainmail. I wanted to have something simple for the game with my wife. I enjoyed it well enough that I continued to use it for that campaign. Also, at least for my wife's game, I was less interested in the crunch as much as I was in the outcome. The focus of our duet game is much more narrative than the fiddly bits, which is why the abstract nature of this approach works very well. So, having developed this first iteration of an adapted chainmail, we get to my Rescue of Hamlet game. I wanted to run OD&D/chainmail battle, at the infamous Moat House from module T1 Village of Hamlet. The inspiration for this was Paul Stormberg's Battle of Moat House that he ran first in 2006 for Gary Gygax and other TSR notables, and has continued to run at GaryCon since. I really enjoyed the game. So I began modeling or rules project, and you can read all about that. Okay, he's got some blog posts. The game, as it currently stands, is more about chainmail with some OD&D tacked on to handle magic and other situations where the RPG provides a framework to resolve things. As I compared to how I run combat in my wife's OD&D game, I ended up far closer to chainmail mass combat as originally written. Melee combat. I started off trying to use the same approach, simple at hit values, with bonuses for attacking as heavy armored versus lesser defending types, as for my personal OD&D games, but I found myself having to deal with defending types of heavy horse in the form of 4 ghouls from the caverns of the Moat House. Rather than try to accommodate that with bonuses or penalties, I decided to go with the mass combat tables for all melees. It worked out fairly well. Characters are throwing lots of dice. The units of 10 bugbears and 10 zombies are throwing 20 dice, which is because they have a hit die or fighting capability of 2 times 10 creatures in the unit. I see that as a feature versus a bug. Most of the multiple hit die or fighting capability creatures ended up being individual figures, so that isn't too bad. Okay. It also allows for 1 person versus 10 soldier unit figures, which gets exciting, but also bears out the math that going solo can be dangerous unless you have magical armor and or weaponry. Missile fire. So when I went to write this small paragraph and reread the rules, something dawned on me. I'd had this figured out wrong. In my previous games of the rescue scenario, missile fire has been way too deadly. I've struggled with that, but now I think I can rock why. I've been trying to mash together individual missile fire and unit missile fire in the same manner I do with mass combat, relying on the total fighting capability of the figure. Except the missile result charts don't work that way. It's written assuming a 10-to-1 or 20-to-1 scale versus a like number, so that the number of hits reflects that too. I was taking the fighting capability of a unit's individual person and multiplying it by 10, because I throw 10 dice for a troop unit, and throwing that number. So a crossbow unit of 10 figures of normal soldiers, I was using the fighting capability 9 to 10 row. In caps, wrong. I'm further backed up by this by looking at the individual missile fire table. A normal individual firing a short bow at someone with light armor will only score a hit about 50% of the time, similar to results from the mass combat table. Only the more advanced individuals representing more figures can score hits on armored targets. So back to the editing table, where I'll have to update my rules. I'm not quite sure what to do if a unit is firing at a single individual. It could get messy. I'm also considering that for missile fire, an individual figure firing at a troop unit can only score 1 hit per shot. Morale. I've opted to go with heavy losses checks. It's effective and has certainly swung the balance of the game in interesting directions. Something I'm considering is how to simplify the post-melee morale check. Right now, it's just too much math for my taste and how I like to run games. What does the post-check do? It replicates something that a lot of war games do based on combat results. Recoil, retreat, rout, or keep slugging it out. Let's see. A DBA is, I think it's like Dibitalis. Was it Dibitalis? It's like Ancient Battles, I think. And then HOTT is Hordes of the Things. Especially use this approach. 2 forces collide and 1 steps back because they couldn't handle the shock of content. I haven't cracked this one yet, but I do think about it. I hope you enjoyed this look into the nuts and bolts of how I use chainmail in OD&D. Still a work in progress. As I listen to others with their experiences, I learn a lot. All right, so let's see. Let me look back here at what's going on in the chat, because I saw a bunch of things listed. So Ian says, oh, this reminds me, if we're looking for more community content, Chris McDowell into the Odd Bastion Land did a stream the other day going over all the blogs he likes. Oh, nice. And then RPG Grandma says, I think for a town. Oh, I see. She's going back to the other blog post. RPG Grandma says, it's odd how no one knows about swords and spells, which is an evolution of chainmail for D&D. I have RPG Grandma. I actually have a copy of Swords and Spells. It's around here somewhere. I'll have to pull it out sometime. I have to go back and read it. Yeah, it is curious. I don't know why more folks don't reference that, but maybe just chainmail works. I mean, what's interesting about what he's doing is this is kind of somewhat similar to what I've been doing. If you've been following all the streams this week up until this one, and I did finish, by the way, I believe I've called it done for the moment. My D6 based kind of dice pool that we're kind of doing different things or similar things here, where my original inspiration for the system is based off of chainmail. The same. Does he have the picture? Does he have the image of it? He does not. But that same kind of light foot, heavy foot, armored foot versus whatever. Except when he talks about in his duet game of having different target numbers, it might be 5, it might be 6, presumably it might be 3 or 4. Instead of that, I give out more. Not give out more. Yeah, I set the target to 6, but I think I give out more dice, and the odds don't exactly work out the same. When I compared them, running some probably imperfect any dice tests, what I found was, for example, if you're in a situation where you'd be rolling 3 dice with a target of 5 or 6, while rolling with 4 dice against a target of 6 instead of 3, it's a little bit less. The interesting bit is, so you could lose a little bit of chance on if you're just looking for a success, but you have the capability of getting an extra success. So if I'm rolling 3 dice with a target of 5 or 6, the most successes I could possibly get was 3. So I'm rolling 3 dice. If I'm rolling 4 dice, and sometimes based on the math, I had to make it 5 dice, or the number jumps by 2, which is why on my table at some point it jumps a bit more than just 1 to 1. You get a couple extra dice, is so that, okay, so now I'm rolling with 4 dice. My odds of getting a 6 are down, but I can get a 4th success. So it kind of balances a little bit. But it's interesting, everyone kind of going back and looking at this. There's just something, it is very kind of nice and clean. There are, when you get to the horse part of it, when you're breaking it out from in sort of a medieval war games environment, it makes a lot more sense having the kind of cavalry stuff. Though I think there are some troops that can achieve kind of a cavalry strength without actually being on a horse, but things get a little bit can get a little bit not confusing is the right word. I don't know, a little bit odd for me anyway. So that was part of the reason why I started changing the names. Instead of using these kind of military names, I based it on skills and sort of the problem skills, and then or the skill level of on the one hand of the sort of the attacker, if you will, and then the difficulty that represents whatever the defending thing is. And for mine, because I'm making a generic system, even though it's based on a combat system, but in terms of chainmail, but I'm using it for all kinds of stuff. Obviously, I wanted to get away from combat nomenclature anyway. RBG Grandma says they've also gone back and looked at chainmail for various reasons. There's a lot of good stuff like OD&D. I really recommend, if you've never read it, just go back and read OD&D. Read the three books, Brown books in particular, and of course the supplements. You've got Greyhawk, Blackmore, Swords and Spells, and the original. They call it Deities and Demigods, whatever they call that original book. Though that one's just more like a listing. It's kind of it's interesting, kind of neat to see it, but it's just a lot of, basically it's like a manual. Like Deities and Demigods is just a listing of a lot of deities and heroes. What's it called? Heroes and something? I have it somewhere too, but I can't remember the exact name. But the three Brown books in particular have a lot of gold in there. Even though they're slim books and they don't have the layout is very basic. The writing is necessarily the most clear. There's a lot of gold. And what's interesting is when you start looking at, then once you've read the three Brown books and then you start looking at the editions that followed, it's interesting to see the stuff that, not just the stuff that was added over time, but there's stuff that kind of fell away. And I go back and I always wish, like, man, I wish that some of the guidance that was in the three Brown books got moved up more, because there's little bits. One of the ones I like is that concept of when you're being chased, you could try to, if it's a non-intelligent creature chasing you, you can drop food behind you and that might stop them. And then if it's an intelligent creature, if you drop loot behind you, that may stop them. And this is stuff that fills a problem that comes up a lot with when you're chasing. Now, it doesn't help you if you are the chaser, but if you are being chased, here's this thing that is a mechanic that's there, but it just didn't make it for whatever reason into other editions. So that bit of wisdom just kind of gets lost a little bit. And when you read them again, you kind of rediscover them. And Holmes is like all these ones are like that too, where you just find this stuff and you're like, man, I wish they hadn't gotten rid of this, or it hadn't slipped through the cracks of whatever editorial process for the next edition. So recommend it. Okay. This one, now we're on to, how are we doing on time? We're doing great. This is posted to Prismatic Wastelands, a little bit older, but not super old. This is from May 25th to the prismaticwasteland.com. It's called How Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Proves Me Right. I'm curious about this. So now I've played a little bit of Tears of the Kingdom. I'm actually enjoying quite a bit. I just haven't had a chance to go back and play it more. I think I've mentioned how the previous Zelda game just irritated me because I still hate the way your weapons and equipment just degrade so quickly. It just made it to me a very frustrating experience. I didn't want to spend as much time as I felt like I had to spend just remaking swords or having to find the stick and find like it just I didn't dig it. It just ended up annoying me. And I think I still think this. Hey, RBG Graham, I gotta go. Well, thanks for joining. And I don't know I'm sure if I asked the designers, if I had ever a chance to talk to them and say, well, why is this mechanic in here? Why did you feel like it was important to have these things degrade and then get destroyed? I'm sure they've got answers. But I will say that for me, it's not worth it. My aggravation having to go through that, it cannot be worth whatever little bit, like, well, you'd end up collecting too much stuff in your inventory. No. Anyhow, this is not about that, I presume. And I will zoom in on this one again. There we go. Let me know if this is not big enough. Video games as a medium owe much to the slightly older medium of tabletop role-playing games. Hit points, experience points, the constant need to collect more and better armor and weapons to combat increasingly dangerous monsters, many hallmarks of video games, in particular the role-playing variety, were borrowed from those ancient tomes of the original Dungeons & Dragons, and some, like my colleague Nick at the Papers Pencils blog, argue that tabletop role-playing games still do RPGs better than video games. I mean, I would agree with that. But this relationship is two-way. Look no further than the recently funded success Break tabletop role-playing game. See the influence of video games on tabletop RPGs in general, and even the OSR and its descendants in particular. One such video game that Break cites as an influence is none other than my topic today, Zelda. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom recently came from on high to great and immediate fanfare and acclaim. If you are on any form of social media, you have already seen people sharing the various weapons of mass destruction they have been creating using the game's new system for building vehicles and other tools, and that is a lot of fun. But what makes this game and its immediate predecessor, Breath of the Wild, so compelling is not simply the ability to construct makeshift B-52 bombers, it is the physics of the game. Now, don't click away thinking I'm about to get into the weeds about how physics work. My scientific knowledge only goes as far as was needed, the bare minimum needed to exit a deficient high school over a decade ago. I don't care about how the physics in Zelda. I care about why physics is so important to what makes these games fun. Hey, Terrence. Terrence says, give me a break. Ian says, now Link has magic duct tape that lets you put powerful monster parts on the end of sticks before they break. Yes, that is true, Ian. That is true. Let's see. I don't care about how the physics in Zelda. I care about why physics is so important to what makes these games fun. I was climbing a large marble column in the game, of course, placed in the middle of a small lake, but I kept slipping and falling off. Link in these games can climb with ease that comes only to those highly trained climbers like my colleague Ty Peter of Mindstorm blog. So there must be some reason I couldn't climb this column. I knew that climbing something while it was raining would make you fall, but it was a sunny day. After only a bit more thought, I realized that it was because I was coming out of the water to climb the column. If I started climbing while dry, I would no longer be too slippery to climb. I set out a platform for me to dry off before my ascent and tested my theory, and it worked. Problem solving is fun, and it was the physics of the game that created the problem and the solution. But it was my own intuition of how things should work that allowed me to find the solution to the problem. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom validates my theory about realism in tabletop role-playing games. The Zelda games do not care about realism for realism's sake. You can fight goblins using jerry-rigged bomber planes while following the orders of a ghost goat person to rescue a princess blinking in and out of time. It isn't going for realism for the sake of realism, to the extent that it attempts to recreate real-world physics. It is to make the consequences of the player actions flow logically from those actions, based on the player's intuition of how things should work. As I argue in the above linked post, this type of realism in games promotes player agency. I won't go so far as to say that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is an OSR/post-OSR game, so I'm willing to hear that argument, but it is similar to the OSR in how it places the focus of the game on player agency. It eschews any sense of railroad and embraces its open world setting with open arms for the same reasons that the arrows Link fires from his bow follow a pseudo-gravity's ring. I doubt the designers of Zelda are familiar with OS enhance the player's sense of agency in the game. So our precepts such as the ICI doctrine or landmark hidden secret, but they come to many of the same conclusions that the OSR has long since reached. Given the wild popularity of the Zelda games and their influence on other wildly popular games like Elden Ring, it is fair to conclude that a wide general audience hungers for more OSR principles in their games. Is it fair that it does so? The dominance of the quote-unquote OC play culture is only propped up by the hobby's most popular IP. Once OSR play styles break into the mainstream TTRPG culture to that extent, I think we will see it embraced with the same fervor as Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild have been. Maybe it already is breaking through, given the recent success of Break and Knave 2nd Edition. We'll see. All right, so a couple of things. I think that these last two Legend of Zelda games are exceptional, and I would probably put Elden Ring in that same thing. It remains to be seen how many games are going to follow this path. So in terms of like, look, it's broken through with Legend of Zelda and this, that. It's like, well, those games have always been exceptional and I don't know what the family tree is when you look at which games inspired other games. But there are certain games that come out, and these aren't even the first ones. I mean, you can go back to Oblivion or however back you want to go in the Elder Scrolls type games, back to Daggerfall and back to Morrowind and etc., that there are these similar sorts of things, and those were also have been very popular games. Skyrim, super duper popular. So this is not new. I feel like looking at Zelda saying, look, see, Zelda, it's yes and no. I mean, Zelda does have different possibilities than those other games do, but I think those other games also represent similar things. We're an open world that you can essentially tackle as you wish. The part about the physics or reality, I think that gets blown. I think that when people talk about the reality of it, and I don't know if I've used the term reality for it, but I think you want things to make sense. However your world is set, it's not that, oh, well, now we have ghosts in the world, so realism out the window. It's like, no, it's whenever you make the world, your world should make sense to itself. If your world has ghosts and those things, then great. And then you just make sense accordingly. And of course, wherever you haven't defined your world, people are going to pull from our world because that's all we have. So yes, like arrows following some kind of pseudo gravity that gives them an arc when they're fired, that's because in, I don't know, any kind of created RPG, no one's changed those worlds and no one's made changes to that way that works. So we just assume it works the way it does in our world. If someone had a game where you're playing on Mars, arrows would react differently, or in some gravity-less space, then our expectations would change because then we would expect them to be. But that point is that whatever your world is and whatever our expectations of that world form, whatever they become, then what's happening should match those. And if they don't, it's either an issue with the players or the GM or both, in terms of not having that meeting of the minds on what this shared reality that we're creating should be. Terrence called it a moist link, wet link, moist link. But yeah, I'm glad that this stuff is taking off. I think the interesting thing is that he takes for granted that we know that since you're wet, you can't climb. But I don't take that for granted. I haven't gotten to that point in the game where I've been wet and feeling it. But I don't know that that's just a physics thing, because I didn't know that if Link was wet, he couldn't climb anything. And does that make complete and utter sense? Maybe. Or do you assume that Link just wipes his hands off before he starts to climb? I don't know. So it's interesting, that kind of thing that he took as just given, that, oh, of course, I know that if Link is wet, they can't climb, but I totally would not have known that. Now, if I didn't know that, would I discover it through the gameplay? Sure. But it does probably give me another point that in terms of as you're a GM and you're going through these things, you have to make sure that your party is aware of these things. If you are having your party trying to climb stuff and fail because they're wet, you should make it clear it's because they're wet, because otherwise they're not going to know. And then they can't make intelligent decisions about, oh, we should dry off first. We should take moist Link and become dry Link. But other than that, nice piece. I don't know. Someone had mentioned break to me, or I saw it somewhere. I don't know what that is. I've heard of it. I've heard of it vaguely. I'll have to look it up at some point. I know Knave 2nd Edition is floating around there somewhere. I'll be interested in that. There might be some version of it you can get. Is this a thing? Let's open up break real quick. Just to anyone in here, if anyone in the chat, if anyone kickstarted break, let me know. Oh, or backed it, right? Ian backed it. Okay, looks like it could be fun. Think action, anime, fantasy. All right. So we got some nice pictures here. So let's see. It says introducing Break. Break is a tabletop role-playing game of exploration and adventure. Break. The setting and aesthetics are inspired by classic anime and Super Nintendo era video games, along with wistful fantasy novels and movies. Break is 470 pages, full color book loaded with diagrams and infographics to make learning and playing the game as fast and fun as possible. Break is ready to ship almost. The game is fully designed and tested. A 95% complete PDF will be available to backers shortly after the end of the campaign, presuming we have funded. And then we got some sample pages, which I'm not going to look at now. Who is Break for? New tabletop role players. Break is simple and quick to learn, perfect for anime and Japanese role-playing game fans looking to try out tabletop games for the first time. 5e players. Break provides a familiar yet clean and modern rule set for those looking for a new place to have their fantasy fun. Gaming parents. Break is 12+. It contains some challenging themes and art that will engage older children, but parental discretion is advised for younger players. And finally, old school players, Break possesses many features that make old school style of play so much fun. It's just a little bit less grimdark. This includes problem-solving focus, zero to hero progression, quick procedures, and modular subsystems. And then we got some influences. And you're expected to, as an adventurer, journey across shattered landscapes, explore ancient ruins and wonders, encounter and interact with many unusual inhabitants, negotiate or fight with monstrous or cunning adversaries, survive and endure many perils and challenges, craft items magical and mechanical, create social bonds, attempt to rise through the ranks, and experience wonder, humor, tragedy, and triumph. Terrence says, not so sure about the logic of the game when you have to nom down like 5 full dinners on a cliffside in order to get enough stamina to finish the climb. Oh, going back to Zelda. And Ian points out that makes stamina potions more efficient. Yeah, the stamina thing is okay because at least it refills, and I can deal with that. But the breakage of the weapons in Zelda, too much. But this new game with this, as Ian called the magic duct tape, does ameliorate that in a couple different ways. Then we get some more details. Okay, well, Break looks cool. Ian, let me know how it is when you get a hold of it. So that was that. We got another prismatic postland, but let me go. Let's shake it up in between those two. This one's from the Zedekshu. I know I'm sure it's Polish. I think it's Polish, but I'm butchering it. .tumblr.com. The post is called Tone is BS. Let me zoom in on this one. There we go. Get out of here. Okay. Hey, Krister, you did almost nearly miss the stream, but you made it. So Tone is BS. Bridewell, The Curse of Strahd But Good adventure that Nova is currently writing and place testing features unsettling puppet people, druids who practice bloody sacrifice, Wickerman style, and child brutalizing werewolves. I don't know if child brutalizing werewolves is something. I mean, that's like a trigger warning. At least for me, being a parent at this point, the idea of having child brutalizing werewolves, not really on my list of like what I want to call out about an adventure. But I don't know. This with the title Tone is BS. This feels like it's written in sort of an edgy style. And maybe now I'm thinking Bridewell, whatever that is also something kind of edgy. And I think a lot of people like Curse of Strahd. Calling it Curse of Strahd But Good. I know people want to just pick on wizards because wizards. But I think in terms of adventures, Curse of Strahd's maybe one of the more well-received, well-reviewed, well-thought of things that Wizards has put out for 5th edition. Krister's glad to see Lemmy abroad my browser tabs. Well, that's where I started the stream, Krister. I was pointing out that we are now second. We are the second largest community on Lem-E. It also features, going back to Bridewell, it also features Padru, a forest god shaped like a giant, cuddly red panda. Aww. 10 out of 10, full marks, no notes. When I encountered Padru during playtests, I was instantly charmed. It was a moment of wonderful relief, a ray of sunshine through cloud cover. In that moment, I saw what the fog-ridden, werewolf-infested forest could be, hope and tragedy. If Padru didn't look cuddly, she was all thorny and dark like a death metal album cover, she would have been predictably boringly in genre, and I would not have cared about her at all. Tone is BS. The film review I dislike the most is the kind of review that docks points for tonal inconsistencies. And he's got a quote here. The tone of this movie is all over the place. The characters quip too much, breaks the mood. Is this a comedy? Why be boring? Why not be both? I wonder whether this has anything to do with being in my context, growing up with horror comedy movies from Hong Kong and Malay language cinema like Zombie Kampung Pisang and Gyeong Si Sin Sang. But terrifying monsters are much more a real thing where I live, so entertainment needs relief of laughter. Maybe this is just personal aesthetic preference. In tabletop game design, especially for games that emulate genre, the horror RPG, the noir RPG, the dark fantasy RPG, there is a strong inclination to go. It is important to design systems and mechanics that set up consistent tone and mood. Respectfully, I disagree. Mood rarely survives contact with the players unless players or GM are theatrically skilled, and your table is strict about enforcing a social contract of the mood we are trying to create for each other. Gods know I'm ass at both of the above, and I'm willing to bet that a fair slice of TTRPG players are like me if we aren't actually the majority. The thing I consider more important than tone that never breaks is meaningful world building, concrete details that feel true, character and geography that responds in living ways. Paju is concrete. Our characters could touch her fur. Her soft autumnal red in a drab monochrome landscape has purpose. She is designed to offer a glimpse of what the forest used to be. Tone is BS. Contrast is where it's at. Showing me a full reality outside horror makes the horror hit harder. I actually think, and I haven't watched a ton of horror movies and things of that nature, but I kind of feel like they've gotten it a little bit wrong. I mean, yes, people will go on about tone, but it's all about what you set up, and it's about your themes. And if the theme of the forest is this thing that's fallen from grace that can come back again, then it would not be out of tone to have this creature there. This creature isn't necessarily breaking the tone. And when people talk about, at least when I see it, and again, it's we're all building straw men of our own, right? This person's building strong men about their experiences, and I'm building my own straw man. It's when things seem inappropriate or not matching a moment. I don't think anyone, let's say, to use movies as an example, thinks in a dramatic movie that there can't be any humor, or if the minute somebody have humor, it's out of place. But that once you've established who a character is, they shouldn't suddenly shift gears. It's not that, oh, you have this creature here who's not grimdark, not some kind of monstrosity, but it's if this creature wasn't consistent once you presented them. Oh, Padru is this red panda. Oh, that's great. And suddenly Padru starts doing something else, like, whoa, what happened to Padru? Now, it could be that there's reasons for it, and that's fine. But oftentimes that stuff comes as the idea that the characters quip too much. It's probably about in what moments are they quipping, is that their character? Because you're watching a movie or reading a book, going through something. And so at some point you feel like you've got this person pegged down, this character pegged. And that's when they start to then suddenly do something outside. It gets far enough away from what you think that character's norm is that you're looking for the reason why this character is doing what they're doing. And if there is no reason, then you're going to say something along the lines of what's happening with the tone. You can't throw a Three Stooges routine into I don't know, Schindler's List, and not have somebody go like, what happened here? We went from doing this, and all of a sudden this other thing's happening, or vice versa. You set up things and you go with it. But often you have dramatic movies that have humor, or you have humorous movies that have drama. I mean, that happens all the time. I mean, the Marvel movies love to dip that line between having fun stuff and then trying to be a little serious and trying to be fun again. They're trying to be whatever, but they set up their consistency. They have some bounds within which they operate. If they suddenly went too far one direction or the other, then you'd get that, what's going on here? And I think that's being a little bit missed maybe in the straw man that they painted. Now, and the other thing is I think they're both important. I think consistency in terms of the world is important. And obviously world building is super important because you need to have the world there. But I don't think that consistency means that everything should be black and white or everything should be Technicolor or something else. It should, just like really with the Zelda thing, it's like you establish some kind of reality, and then that reality should make sense. Because if I'm a player in that game, I need to be able to make sense of the world, to make sense of decisions and how my decisions work, all that kind of stuff I'm trying to do with my character. The world needs to make sense in some way. And so it should be consistent in some ways that we can count on as characters participating. Do I sound like a defensive MCU fan? Brian Smith says, it seems like you only care about tone when something is off tone and it feels weird and bad. That's probably true. I mean, that's when you notice. I mean, it's like anything. You only notice it when it's sticking up at you, right? When the surface seems nice and smooth and everything seems to make sense, and you don't really see it. Then you see one piece poking up, all of a sudden you notice it. So it's a range. And it's a range, and it depends on a lot of things. And I think it says more probably about how these things are being run, or how a book is being written, that the party feels like they're in a grimdark situation, and then there's a ray of sunlight somewhere, and suddenly that's tonally off. Probably says more about this world they've been playing, and the fact that maybe it's too much of one kind. It's been too narrowly focused, and so that anything outside of it suddenly strikes a bad nerve. But yeah, I mean, I think you're going to tend to notice things when they seem off to you, and because if they don't seem off to you, they're not noticeable. They're just going to be part of the scene. Oh, Terrence is talking about, oh, not me, the article writer. I don't know, because I don't know if that's really what they want. Maybe they are. I mean, obviously they like Bridewell, whatever Bridewell is, and I'm glad they're enjoying it. Though again, if you're putting as your bullet point child brutalizing werewolves, yeah, probably not my speed. You could just put brutal werewolves. That probably would have worked. I don't know, but that's fine. Hey, this was posted to Lemmy. So appreciate that. And I think there's an interesting discussion to be had there. But I feel like we're maybe this person, the way they're thinking about it and the way I'm thinking about it are a little bit different. Because they seem to kind of put tone as something that's like, it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Like monolithic. Your tone, that's it. There's always some variance. I mean, you can think of some of the best movies, at least movies I love a lot, that, to look at it this way, say a film noir. I mean, one of my favorite movies of all time, and one of the, I don't know, stereotypical film noirs is The Maltese Falcon. And that has plenty of humor. There's a lot of humor in The Maltese Falcon in different ways. And no one talks about that like, oh, it's ruining the tone. But all the humor makes sense in terms of the characters, where it's happening, who's doing it, who's what. It makes sense. It's not suddenly a character acting in a totally out of character way at some point in Name of Humor, when Bogart and what's his name? Oh, I can't remember. When the different characters get into it and there's humor, Peter Lorre. So you have a really funny exchange between Bogart and Peter Lorre, and it's funny, and it's meant to be. I think we're supposed to think it's funny. And heck, I think at the end of it, Bogart laughs because it's even funny in the scene. But the point is, it makes sense in terms of Peter Lorre's character, in terms of Bogart's character. It all makes sense. It all fits. It's not like they suddenly started tap dancing and singing a song. That would be tonally off. Ian says, if you want to really get away from Western European tropes, check out more of Zedek's stuff. Well, maybe I will. Well, I mean, he's on the Lemmy, so I'm sure he'll post more stuff to his that he's been doing. And like I said, this Bridewell might be fun. I'm just not. Child brutalizing kind of turns me off. Frankly, it's like cheap heat. Doing things to kids, cheap heat, as they would say in sort of a wrestling sense. You could do better, Bridewell. All right. But I mean, like this, showing me the full reality outside the horror makes the horror hit harder is absolutely true. But that doesn't really, I don't feel like that's a tone thing necessarily. Okay, well, that was Tone is BS. How are we doing on time? Well, we are at time. Terrence is out of the loop. You're out of the loop, Terrence. What is Lemmy? Oh, Terrence. Since we're at time anyway, let me just go back to the beginning. So Lemmy, so there's two things. There's Lemmy, and I'm just going to spell it out here. The only way it's going to make sense. Lemmy. Lemmy is an app that is a Reddit alternative. So you're talking about communities on a server. What happened was, when Reddit had that mod-driven blackout and protest of Reddit changes a week ago, from Monday, or a little bit more than a week and a half ago now at this point, I looked around to see what was happening, and from Mastodon, mostly, I learned that people were creating alternate communities on instances of Lemmy. There's another application that's also usable called Kbin. Some people went to Kbin. Some people went to various instances or kind of servers that were running Lemmy and creating their communities on there. The instance of Lemmy that I chose is lemm.ee. And I created a OSR/NSR community there to fill in while Reddit's down. And it's been growing apace. Hey, Ian just threw the link in there for me. Thank you. As if it's a Motorhead fan site. It's funny because I always keep thinking about Lemmy from Motorhead. Rest in peace, Lemmy. Pour a little out for him. But we picked an instance and we dropped it in there. And Lemmy, like Mastodon, uses, I think it's called ActivityPub, which is a framework that has all these different applications, allows these different applications to talk to each other. So for instance, you can follow a Kbin or Lemmy community on Mastodon, and you can post in a Lemmy community and it will post to Mastodon, and you can respond in Mastodon. It will show up on Kbin or Lemmy. It's pretty neat in that way. You can really, it really connects these things in ways that you can't do natively through, you can't get Twitter and Reddit just to talk to each other. It's right. You can get a bot to do things, but this is all just the way ActivityPub interacts, which is cool. So I created it essentially to have, and it's been going pretty well. Like I mentioned before, on our particular instance, which is, I don't know where lem.ee stands in terms of how the largest or smallest of the different instances, because each instance is a server, and that server, it can be large, small, whatever. But on this particular server, we are standing currently, if I'm reading this correctly, and it's a little bit hard to say because they don't sort this table on subscribers, they do it on users per month. We're over at the 263, putting us solidly, well, not too solidly, 10 ahead of UK politics as the largest, second largest, only to the Meta, which is the community about talking about this particular instance. So it makes sense that I have a lot of subs. Outside of that, we are the now largest community on this instance. Lem, well, actually, it would be like LEMMEE, Brian Smith. But yeah, basically, LEMM.EE. So folks have been kind enough to use it, and it's been nice because I haven't had to. Well, one of the things that happens, I don't know if you've ever started your own forum. I mean, I'm still struggling with that, or do your own anything that you mean to be as a community. There's some segment of time, hopefully it's doesn't last forever, that you kind of have to post your own stuff. You have to, because you want someone to go to this forum or whatever it is, and if it looks empty, obviously no one's going to stick around. So you kind of have to seed it with your own content, and then you hope at some point you get enough momentum going that people will start seeding it for you with other stuff. And it's been good because we've got have had a good stream of folks posting their own stuff. So here he posted, or somebody did. I don't know if the Zedek is copacetic. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but they posted that. That's where I grabbed this from. Some of these are videos, so I didn't obviously I'm not going to look at videos on the channel during the stream. I mean, maybe at some point I will, if I can figure it out. So yeah, and so you can join different instances, Terrence. You don't have to. The nice thing about everything, they call it federated, gets moved around. If you want to join and make a user on lem.ee, you're welcome to. But you can actually make your user on any of the other kind of Lemmy instances, and yet you could still subscribe and post to our group. So you can bounce around. Now, there are, I suppose, as just a note, since I'm talking about it, there are a couple of different OSR groups. You'll see a few, 3. Let me see if I go there. Yeah. OSR. It's working. And keep in mind also, and this is good probably for everybody, that it's still early days. And Lemmy and Kbin, Lemmy is more mature than Kbin, which is the primary reason why I went to Lemmy. But we don't know what the end result of which one of these. Kbin's slightly different than Lemmy. There probably going to be some other thing that will come out. Like there's going to be other things. Like I feel like there's going to be more moving around and just shaking out of things. And of course, what happened was these apps were kind of in development. They were out there, but they weren't really populated. And then all of a sudden there's been an explosion over the last couple of weeks in signups. I think Lemmy, I saw recently, went over 1 million users. So they're getting, people are hammering these things in ways that nobody had been able to really test and figure out and work with. So there's a lot of stuff going on. It's still, there's going to be clunkiness to it. The interface is, some people are going to love, some people are going to be okay with it. Some people are going to hate it. That stuff's going to be sorted out over time. Performance is going to be up and down. These servers, these instances are all run by usually individual people right now. So it's like lem.ee, the person who's kind enough to host this, has either a Patreon or a coffee page or something to help support server costs, and already had, I think, did one upgrade of the server already just because of the influx from Reddit folks. So there's performance is going to be up and down. This is not right. This is not a corporate thing like Reddit, which is already scaled out and whatever. So you gotta kind of work with it. This is all really grassroots, garage band, punk sort of phase, which makes it a lot of fun, but means that there's going to be a lot of things to it. And so because of that, like, I think I was the first one to put out a community, I think, but because there's lag times when you create a community and then when it kind of migrates across all these different servers, I think when I created it, someone slightly later than me, I think, though, maybe they were first, I don't know, made another OSR community, and I think there might even be another one. And actually, one of the people reached out to me the other day and asked me if I wanted to merge everybody over to their community, kind of join communities. And they were like, hey, I'll make you a mod and we can add my stuff. But I told them, so my point of view so far is like, I'm going to put a pin in it for right now, for the reasons I just mentioned. There's things, still a lot going on. I've posted this to various places, and I don't want people to come. And then because if I put a sign that says I went over here suddenly to move, I don't want to close it. I don't know how that stuff works. Like if I just close this thing tomorrow because some other community blew up and that's where everybody decides to go. And I feel like, well, I don't need this. I don't know how that all works yet. So I'm hoping that there'll be more tools and more information as a moderator about how to handle all these different things, migrating, things like that. The other thing was, and I didn't mean this, I hope it didn't come off as being mean, but like their OSR is their community right now is a lot smaller than mine. So it also didn't make sense. So why am I going to ask 260 people to move? You've got, 90 people. Why don't you ask the 90 people to come over here if you want to? They haven't responded back to me, so I don't know how that's going to go. But I think I just feel like, and the other thing is too, we don't have to have a monolithic community. It's fine to have multiple OSRs. It's very easy to subscribe to all of them. We can do what we did in Reddit, which is cross post stuff. And I've subscribed to their OSR things too. So, and like I told them, it's like, I'm not a mod by nature. I didn't come in because, I'm losing my mod status. I need to be a mod and have that control. I don't care about that. I just did it because I felt like there was a need, or at least no one else had done it, so I did it. So who knows in the future? Maybe at some point something will happen and I'll turn it over to somebody else, or I'll give up my mod status. I don't know. We'll see. But I just thought for now, I'm not going to worry about combining. It's okay to have multiple servers, multiple instances, multiple communities. It's easy to cross post. People can then have a little bit better discoverability, because what can happen with these instances is you can defederate, which means that if you're on like lemmy.ick, can decide, I don't want to see anything from lemmy.ee, and then they kind of disassociate. Then having something in another place means just more visibility. So right now I said, what, I'm not really concerned about it. But we'll see. We'll see. But if you, mine is OSR/NSR tabletop role-playing games, which is on lem.ee. And then there are other ones. Am I looking at communities or am I looking at posts? What are they showing me? I just want to see the communities. Oh, you know what? I'm not looking at communities. I'm looking at posts. So let me show it here. Will be better. This will be better. It's only showing 2. Now this isn't right. I think there's at least another one. I thought this is showing 2. I thought there was even a third one, and I thought theirs had more than 4, but there might be one somewhere else. Hold on a minute. There might be. Let me see if I go to, because I also subscribe to some of them on. Where's search? Is that under explore? Oh, there he is. OSR. Okay, so there's Old School Revival, that one. There's this one, Old School Renaissance. Oh, that's why I didn't come up to OSR. And there's mine. I thought there was even another one. I thought, who is it that contacted me? Let me just see really quick. Would it be under? No, not reports. a Lemmy Tiger Claw Lemmy World. Was Lemmy.world.osr. Okay. So this is the other one. See, on this, since I'm logged in under LemE, when I go to theirs, their direct link is under their server instance, so I'm not logged in. But I could subscribe to theirs through here, which I thought I had done, but maybe I hadn't, or I couldn't find it. So they've got, I think I looked it up before. Where was theirs on this list? So they're now at 131. Oh, interesting. So I've got 52 subscribers on theirs, and so they have access. So you see, there are more of them on this instance than on the one I'm on. That one's, I don't know what old school RuneScape is, but these are the ones. So there's at least 4. So there you have it. Oh yeah, and don't forget Krister. Yeah, let me highlight. Krister's got a couple of communities also. Don't want to forget. He's got a hex crawl. I think I'm subscribed to it. Maybe I'll just go to local. He's got a solo playing tabletop role-playing games alone. I am joined that one, managed by Krister. If I click on him, does it give you all the list? And he's also got a hex crawls and an RPG game design. I don't think I'm subscribed to that. I'm not, so I'll subscribe. So Krister's got a few things going on here. I did subscribe to that one. Okay. A hex crawling one, a solo one, and an RPG design one. Terrence says, file that under them, thinking it never hurts to ask. Oh, in terms of joining up, I don't blame him. I'm just not sure it makes sense now. And like I said, I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I'm the big boy here, but to me, it doesn't make, like, I don't know this person's history, right? So, and I wonder at some point, maybe it hasn't happened yet, maybe it will, where a lot of the Reddit mods are going to come over, and maybe they're going to try to kind of big ball people to be like, well, I was the mods of ROSR, and I'm here now, so come join this. And like, maybe, like, I don't know, like, they didn't do it at the time. At the time when they blacked it out, no one had done it, so I did it. So hopefully I'm not stepping on someone's toes. I mean, I don't really care if I am, because they don't own me. They don't own OSR. But I wasn't meaning to steal. This wasn't this is my big chance to steal power. So I don't. So I know this person that's running these other one. I don't know what their background is, if they're what it is. And they were kind enough to say, they weren't trying to like take me over. They were saying, hey, I'll make you a mod too. They were like, even like, hey, I'll put your links to your stuff in the sidebar like I have it now. Like they kind of sweetened it up and made it kind of nice. But just at the moment, it just feels like just have people let people make their communities. And oftentimes a lot of these different communities take on different characters, a different character, and it's fine. Like, we don't have to have one, because they can all communicate back and forth and back, I think, fairly easily. So I'm fine to just kind of let him roll for right now. And who knows, maybe his community will take off and just get more eyeballs, and then suddenly he'll come back around and they'll be like, well, we're at 1,000 members and you're only at 300. And then it might be like, yeah, maybe it makes sense to merge over at that point, because maybe people have decided that other communities run better, has better things, whatever. Right. For right now, it's early days, and I'm not gonna sweat it. And hopefully, since it seems like a bit of a mystery how one would do this kind of merging, and especially the other thing is, since there are tons of folks coming from Reddit, and I think they're going to keep coming over time, I hope anyway, I want to reduce as many barriers to entry. And like I said, if I close up shop, if I were to hit the delete button tomorrow, and then, because I did post, the only posts I've done on Reddit since I left the blackout was to post that this thing existed here. So I posted to ROSR, and I was wondering if it would get locked, deleted, blocked, or downvoted to hell. It actually didn't. And some people were having, and some people saw it and said, oh, I'm going to come over and join, or let me look it up, or whatever, which is great. So I don't want, if that someone sees this same thing next week or whatever, that suddenly they go to it and it doesn't exist anymore, and then they just give up or whatever, so I want, let all this hash out. And then as this stuff develops, as everything settles, then, and hopefully at that point, maybe there'll be more tools for, oh, we want to merge communities, or how do we do that in ways, or people are more comfortable so that if I do lock the door on this community and say, go to the other one, that I can feel that people will go, and I want to be leaving people behind. Because the last thing I want to do right now is leave folks behind. People who feel enough and get strongly motivated enough to leave Reddit, I want to make sure there's the least amount of barriers to moving as I can. And if that means having some, not just one community, but 4 kind of spread across, hey, let's do that. Hey, Magnus, working from home. Well, congrats. So you can hopefully catch more streams. Well, that's the goal, right? I mean, at least from my point of view, everybody should be catching more streams. So welcome aboard. I'm about to shut her down for the day, but appreciate you hitting it. Even if it's only for a moment, you can always rewind to the start and check out what you missed. Ian says he was curious whether Reddit mods would encourage or delete. I don't know if they encouraged it, but they didn't delete it. And I hate to even go in that Reddit app because then it encourages them to think I'm still there. But I had gotten at least, like, I got that notification that I had at least 10 upvotes. So if they didn't encourage it, they didn't actually delete it, which is good. And then Magnus asks, 2 sessions into their Worlds Without Number game, and the party has finally run out into the wilds. Looking forward to applying my tutelage in the sessions to come. Oh, that's awesome. And then Ian just wrapped the Worlds Without Numbers game. At some point I'll have to go back and actually read through the Worlds Without Numbers, the actual mechanical bits, because I love the world building bits, but that's kind of where I started and ended. Might be nice to look at the mechanics, but good luck with the wild stuff. And let me know if you have any questions. July's right around the corner, so there'll be another kind of Q&A, AMA in terms of the hex crawling. And just, even without that, come on to Lemmy. Krister's got you covered. He's got a hex crawl community, or you can come to the OSR community, or both, and drop in your questions and comments. I'm just going to go through. I already upvoted a bunch of stuff. I'll upvote some other stuff. I don't see Worlds Without Number talked about super a lot. Well, it gets talked about a lot, but I always feel like it's talked about with the tools and less about the mechanics. But it's got great tools, so I could see why people would talk about it. Let's see. Oh, the other thing I will note is, patrons and some other folks, channel members, I'm going to ship out version 1 of my Do Anything D6 system to you folks this afternoon, so you guys can check it out. It will end up on itch or something, the SRD version. This is the SRD version, so I still need to get it all typeset. It's kind of the last piece of the zine that I need to finish. So I will typeset. I also want to add for the zine version examples. And also, I know I talked about yesterday on stream of having the cleric conversion and the thieves skills conversion as part of the SRD, but I ended up taking it out. I'm going to do that as part of the zine, the SRD. Though what I did end up doing between yesterday and today in terms of the mechanic itself is I added in a bit about running opposed tasks. So things like chases and tug of war type stuff. So look for that, patrons and channel members, this afternoon, and other folks probably next week. Sometime there'll be something for you. Magnus asked Ian about Worlds Without Number, and Ian says it's pretty well built and a good space between rules light and crunchy. Just wish the book was a little clearer and less prosy in places. And Magnus says they're excited to see how system strain and shock play in particular. Well, it sounds like I need to break that up. Maybe I'll set that up for next week. We shall see. The book isn't quite as easily referenced as it builds. It's hard though, right? Because you get a lot of you want the readability. Like the SRD stuff, just putting in rules doesn't read that well. Some stuff that reads that well ends up being less, but it's very it's easy to reference. Stuff that's easy to read oftentimes isn't easy to reference. So it's a hard balance. All right, folks, we'll have an awesome Friday if you're watching this now. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. If you give a thumbs up on your way out, that'd be awesome. If you found stuff in here and you're not subscribed to the channel and you enjoyed this, if you would think about subscribing, that would also be awesome. Otherwise, folks, have a great rest of your days. Ian just placed some more links in chat. Yes, the forums, it's not struggling forums. My forums, which is the first source for all things about me, has a small but vibrant community at forums.hexedpress. feel free to go there as well. Some folks had asked me if, having the Lemmy community was basically going to mean the end of the forums, what I was going to do. And I'm keeping them both, because the one thing about the forums is that's on my server. It's mine. It is mine. Everything else may fail. Lemmy may fail. The skies may fail. The forums will soldier on, and nobody has control over that but me. So that will ultimately always be there. Everything else, and like I said, I think what I mentioned, or how I phrase it about this OSR Lemmy community, is that I'm caretaking it. It's not mine. Doesn't have my, I'm not have my name on it. It's not necessarily, I'll post my stuff there because, I gotta do that. I gotta spread the word somehow. And as long as I'm needed, I'll moderate it. And I might need other moderators at some point. Maybe I'll reach out to folks at some stage. Right now it's all small, early days, and the community's small. Everyone's nice and polite. So really haven't had to do anything, but the time may come when I'll need help. But the forums, is mine, and the OSR community, I consider myself the caretaker. So that's where that sits. Anyhow, game on, everybody, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.